Off a day. Ginger Cruz agreed to do this one-on-one interview with Kandit News after her opponent, Congressman Jim Moylan, pulled out of a previously scheduled debate. The pullout was a blessing in disguise, as Kandit was able to ask her questions that hadn't been previously asked, and she was able to provide answers unencumbered by a time limit. Here is our interview with Democratic candidate Ginger Cruz. Good evening, Ms. Cruz, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Troy. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate your time. We'll get straight to this interview, and we have multiple segments to go through, and I'm sure our audience will appreciate this discussion. I think you'll appreciate our discussion tonight. The first question I have for you isn't something that concerns me. In fact, I think there are misogynistic undertones to it, but so many people, I'm sorry, not so many people, a few people have asked, and well, why is your last name Cruz?
That's a good.
You don't have to answer this question. I'm not going to hold you to it.
No, it's a good question. It's a good question.
Okay.
So, just for context, I think the first thing I would say is we don't call her Lou Cook, the governor of Guam. We don't call the Vice President of the United States Kamala M. Hoff. So it is a practice nowadays, and it's been this way for at least 20 years, that professional women very often keep their names when they build a professional reputation. So if you reel it back to the days when I started in TV, I was Ginger Cruz.
I remember, yeah.
I was extremely proud of my name because I'm an only child. And I felt like if the name went away, that somehow my dad's legacy would not be there. So I really wanted to keep my name. But as we know in Guam, when you get married, it's very traditional. And so the tradition was he really insisted that I change my name. And so 2 years into my TV career, I did change my name. And it was very difficult at the beginning because everybody knew me as Ginger Cruz, and then all of a sudden I'm Ginger Cruz. So I built a television career on that. I then went and did incredible things, worked at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I had my job at the Special IG for Iraq Reconstruction. And the internet came around. So at this point, I had built a 20-year career and reputation and network, and everybody knew me as Ginger Cruz. So when I got divorced in the mid-2000s, and it was an amicable split, my husband and I agreed that I would keep the name because it was a professional issue, right? And I had built all of my career into that. And so, if I change my name, if somebody's looking me up, they're not going to know all of the things that I did because I would have a different name. So
the generals and the colonels and the U.S. senators and the department secretaries who you met.
All sorts of people that knew me, that was the name that they knew. And so, and legally you can keep the name, and it was an agreement, and so it was fine. And I had great respect because, over those 20 years, I became so much a part of the Guam culture. The Tenorio Uggan Cruz family really, to this day, I have such respect for them, and they taught me so much about, everything about Guam culture, about their history, about, my mother-in-law talking about what it was like when the Marines came and liberated Guam and she was going through Menengan. All of that. I was such a part of the family, right? So you fast forward. So I got divorced, was then, continuing with my career. And then I met my current husband. And we're later in life, at this point we're, close to 50. And when we decided to get married, he understood that that was my professional name. And he was extremely understanding. And he said, you've built a career on that name. Everybody knows you by that name. And I said, I'd really like to keep my name the same because it was my career. And my career, anybody who knows me knows that my career is very important to me. and I've put a lot into it, my reputation. So I kept it. And so I came to Guam, and people never had an issue with it. But when you run for political office and when you're doing well, people have to find something. And I know there have been stories about this. And I came back to Guam, I had no thought of running for anything. I came back in 2019, was running my business, taught at the University of Guam. And then when I decided to run in February of this year, that was really the first time. So it wasn't, that I thought this through, or, it was literally, it's my professional name. And if you look, and it's, people will say, oh, well, it was, why did you keep your married name? Why didn't you switch back to your maiden name? But I built my career on Ginger Cruz.
And
right?
the internet came about during
and
the search engines.
And the internet has, everything that I've done. And so I felt the same way that hundreds of thousands of women all across the world do the same thing. You've got people, and even like ex-husbands. Tina Turner kept her ex-husband's name. She's not even married to him anymore, but she built her reputation on that name, and so she kept it. So,
I love Tina Turner.
she is pretty awesome.
Are your parents still around?
So my father passed away, but my mom is still around. She's 92 years old.
Oh, okay. What a blessing.
Yes.
So what values did they try to instill in you that when, you go about your life on a day-to-day basis, you think to yourself, I need to do that better. I need to follow what mom and dad tried to tell me to do better about?
So my mom and dad, I think, were pretty unique. People who knew me from high school in St. Anthony, small story, but it kind of tells what they were like.
We have all this. This is your interview.
So I used to come home. I used to be a very bookish kid, right? So I'd go to the library, read all the books, and I'd bring all my books home. And we had this free Pan Am bag I used to stuff all my books in, right? And it used to put blood blisters on my shoulder because it was such a heavy bag. And my dad was like, oh, no, we can't have that. So, and this was in the 70s. He got wood and Elmer's glue and some wheels, and he built me a cart, a 2-wheeled cart. Before rolling luggage was invented, my dad made rolling luggage. I was thinking to myself, why didn't he patent that, right? And he got a free box from Payless, like a ketchup box. And he put it there, he tied it to it with a rubber, thing, and then he put all my books in it. And then they put my Holly Hobby lunchbox on top of that because mom didn't want to waste money on paper bags. And then they sent me to school with the cart. And if you want to build character in a child, send them to junior high at the time in, a school, St. Anthony, with a cart.
I actually heard this story a couple of decades ago about you, and I heard that you were bullied.
Yeah,
because of that cart.
I was bullied, but it was something that you learn to deal with, right? One day, a couple of kids said, oh yeah, your dad made that. They threw it off the second story of the school. It landed down the bottom, and guess what? Dad's engineering, not a scratch. Went back down there, gathered up all the books, put them back in, dragged it back up the stairs. But that was really what my parents taught me. They were creative. They were ingenious. They were hardworking. They were thrifty. We never wasted money. We would, turn off our lights because the electricity was too expensive. We had a very simple house in Leewin Terrace. My mom, I always thought steak was rare because we liked rare steak, but it turns out she just didn't want to leave the stove on any longer because she didn't want to pay the electricity bill to save for college, and those were the times where, if you had a house and you could afford it, things were expensive, and you wanted to make sure that you saved enough money to send your daughter to college. So I think the creativity of my parents, the hard work, they were both incredibly hardworking. They both were very invested in education. My mom was a teacher at Finnegatchen Elementary School. She had a master's degree from Columbia University.
Wow.
And so she, her full-time job when I was little was raising me. And then once I was a certain age, then she went and she taught school. But she taught me to read by the time I was 2.
Wow.
And, I can remember some of my earliest things were she was doing flashcards, teaching me how to add and subtract. And I think I was maybe 3 years old. but that always stuck with me. So that ability to continue learning and to work really hard and to have a character where you can handle other people criticizing you and keep a smile and keep on going. I think all of that was really instilled in me by, I thought, just amazing parents. And I'm so, so grateful that they spent as much time as they did raising me. But you know, the most important thing, and I think this really applies to today, they always told me it was about giving back. And they said, you know, you go out into the world and you go to a good school and you learn and you figure out what you want to do in life and you do the best you can. And then you give back. And
do you feel you've given back enough?
I do
to
not.
make them proud?
I do not think I've given back enough. I think I make them proud, but that's why I continue to do the work that I do. You know, and my mom's amazing. She prays for me a lot, and those prayers are very strong. But when I first told her I was going to teach at UOG, she was so excited. And then when I told her that I was planning to run for Congress, you know, she was even more excited. But it was always, make sure you do a good job, make sure you work really hard, and make sure that you give back to people, because you're privileged and you had these great opportunities to learn and do things in your life. And you have a responsibility to give back to people. And my parents always told me that, and I think that stuck with me throughout my life.
In some of your campaign material, I have seen your very cute grandson. What's his name?
Elias.
Elias.
Well, Elias. I call him Elias.
Elias or Elias. All right. Well, so tell us about the Guam you grew up in, and then tell us about the Guam you want Elias to grow up in.
So the Guam that I grew up in the 70s was really simple. We didn't have a lot of options to go to stores, and the ones we had, we just loved, right? Townhouse back in the day when it was just that white low, it was like a trailer-like looking place down where, in Agania, like right at the main intersection with Purple Heart Highway. And there wasn't a lot of variety of things to do because in those days there was no internet, there was no cell phones, right? So I read a lot of books. My mom brought me to the Dedido Library a lot, and I read just about every book in the Dedido Library. I started at one end. I figured it was the easiest way to do it, right? So for a month I'd be into history, and then the next month I'd be into psychology, and the next month I'd be, you know, it just kind of went through. And then I loved to swim.
Where would they take you?
So I got swim lessons at the Okura Hotel, which is the Loti now.
Yeah.
And
so many people won't know that reference.
The
Okura Hotel.
I know.
With the goldfish?
Yes. Yes, because it was really the Continental Hotel.
I don't even remember that.
Okay, so you know kind of where Guma Tranquilidad and Pacific Star is. There used to be these little individual rooms that were like not all strung together, but they were like bungalows or whatever.
Okay.
And that was a Continental Hotel. And then there was the Hilton, and then there was the Okura on the other side of Tumon. But there wasn't a lot of hotels. But locals could get a pass to get into the Okura Hotel. And there was a lady named Carol who taught us how to swim, and it was Red Cross. So the Red Cross had beginner, intermediate, you know, so I had my friends, and we learned how to swim. And I loved to swim. I loved to skin dive. I loved to go fishing. I loved to do underwater spear fishing, which I just thought was amazing. But all of it was things that you did because there wasn't a lot of development. There wasn't a lot of, I guess, a city to Guam. It was much more rural, right? So there was school, there was your friends, your parents, and that. And I think at the time, I felt like everybody had such pride in Guam. Even after Typhoon Pamela just mowed everything down, which I think played a huge role in shaping my tolerance for disasters. You know, once you lived through Typhoon Pamela, which was just an incredibly strong storm, you know, after that, everything else seemed not so bad. But after that, you know, we lived in Liguan Terrace. It was a very modest neighborhood. It was the first really big development in Guam, the Kaiser developments. But everybody cared about where they lived.
You felt loved?
Felt completely loved. It was easy to find people. You'd go down to Plaza de España. There really wasn't a lot of crime that you saw. Everybody looked after each other. And the roads were so well taken care of. My dad was a highway engineer. So proud of the roads that they developed. And the minute that you'd have like a problem with it or the lines would fade out, they'd have the federal funds and they'd go in and they'd fix up the lines. And
good golly, where is that now?
But it's so complicated, right? There's so many reasons why things happen or don't. But back in the day, I'm sure there were those issues, but I think everybody really cared about the community in a way that was personal. And so you didn't see junk cars. You didn't see people dropping trash. You didn't see, it may have been a really simple Iguanteras house, but we'd go out there and we'd like cut the grass to the point that, you're making sure even the grass that comes over the part where you walk, we'd even cut that part with scissors, or there's shears. But it was like people cared. And then you fast forward to today, and a lot of the things that were new and shiny and just built and were so exciting back then, the first time that a hotel opened and you were like, oh, the Reef Hotel or the Pacific Star Hotel, right? Beautiful. You come back, right? And I've been back for 5 years, but you see so many places closed down, shuttered, graffitied, turned into a dialysis center, which then is sort of like a double hit to the gut, right? Because that means people aren't healthy. And instead of a new business taking over that space, it's now taking care of people who aren't even, they're not healthy and they need that help. And I'd made a comment to somebody that there was, when I got back, I really saw it. Some places were just tired and old and molded, and the sign was kind of hanging off from the last typhoon. Now, I don't mean to say, so many parts of Guam are beautiful, but I feel like we're struggling now. And I feel like we need to do something. There needs to be an intervention in order for us to turn that back around and get on a path where we can start bringing it back up. And part of the problem that we have as an island is that we're all kind of blaming each other inside the island. Oh, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. But we're not really bringing our head up and looking around us and going, why are we in this situation? Why are things so difficult? Is it really us? Or are there systemic things and things that can be changed that would give us an opportunity to do something and lift ourselves out of the predicament that we all find ourselves in? I'm not saying that people aren't responsible. Yes, people could do a better job. And some people are doing a fantastic job, don't get me wrong. There's new stores that are incredible. The culture has had this amazing renaissance. The number of small businesses with creative things that are just as good as anything that you would see in the most amazing tourism nook or cranny in the States or around the world, it's all there. So there's parts of Guam that are rising, but there's parts of Guam that are just struggling. And the most important parts are the ones struggling. The hospital, the schools, housing. There's so many things, and those are ones that are suffering from big systemic issues that are contributing to their struggle. And it just, you always think back on your childhood and say, things were so much better when I was growing up.
It's a romanticized.
It is romanticized, right? Because things were not better back then. There was a lot less. But it was also simpler. And I think the complexity of today and the challenges that we face today are daunting. And that really kind of gets to the heart of why we need to have leadership that all works together, have people stop blaming each other, and just simply get to the job of figuring out how do we fix it.
What do you say to your detractors who criticize you for being, verbose? The criticism from your detractors, from some of them, is she talks a good game, but there's not much substance behind it. Your response to them?
So I want to know what the lack of substance is, because I believe that my life stands as the evidence. I went to school, I succeeded. I'm a Harmon Loop Elementary girl that made it to the Ivy Leagues because I studied, and there's the evidence. I came back to Guam. I worked in media. I didn't just work in media. I transformed media. I mean, I actually helped take cable up to the point, and then when I transferred over to KUAM was so successful that cable went out of business.
You're one of the most recognizable names in Guam media, Ginger Cruz.
And in addition, in KUAM, I mean, I was part of the shift where we took it from ORDOT with Nestor and everybody. I'm not saying it's just me, and I don't like to take full credit because you can't. It was a team. But I had a huge role in that team. I was a leader in that team. And we took KUAM, we moved it up to Dedido, designed the whole station, redid the formatting, got everybody on board, redid everything about it, right? Created shows, morning shows, evening shows, and just re-energized it and delivered and produced, right? I left, I went to the States. People don't really know a lot about what I did when I went to the States, but the things that I did at the Special IG for Iraq Reconstruction created a federal agency from scratch, literally. That's not having a job. It's not like I went to the States and I applied for a job and I got my job and did it. Created an agency from scratch.
The $35 million agency.
$35 million a year agency. When I was here and I worked for the Torres administration, I mean, we did incredible things, lowered long distance rates for everybody on Guam, and that was a huge fight with the FCC.
I remember that.
And it was all of us. It wasn't just me. It was all of us working together to do something transformative, right? I founded a business which was transformative, one of the first compliance businesses, helping American companies to work in incredibly difficult circumstances all around the world and comply with the law, tax law, labor law, creative ways of doing that, right? Came back, taught at UOG, wrote my own war games. And I'll tell you what, those kids, amazing. And they got skills and learned how to do things that they would not have normally done. So my entire life, I would lay before the people of Guam as a testament. Everything I've ever done, I don't just do it normally. I pour myself into it. And I work, I always say it's like going down a rabbit hole. I work really, really hard at it. Campaigning. I've never run for political office. This is my first time putting together a campaign. And the people of Guam can judge.
Well, you're everywhere. I've been telling people, Ginger Cruz seems to be the hungriest candidate there because you're really everywhere. You're on social media. Everywhere I drive, you're waving.
And
you canvassed my neighborhood yesterday.
An incredible grassroots team that I managed to pull together, and God bless all of them. I mean, so many volunteers. But part of that also is the organization, putting it together. We have an incredible organization. And that's from scratch. Never done that before. And this is how my parents taught me to do everything in my life. If you're going to commit to doing something, don't just do it. Make sure you do it well, commit yourself to it, and literally put every ounce of yourself into it.
Gosh, you just gave me PTSD. I just heard my dad coming out of the grave telling me that same exact thing.
There you go.
All right. Thank you. As our interview continues, Ginger Cruz takes our questions about how she can help the poor and the downtrodden if elected as our next delegate. When we come back, she'll share with us innovative and visionary solutions to Guam's biggest problems.
As we move forward in this election, as we contemplate who we're going to be supporting, it's so important that if we're going to maintain this level of effectiveness in the Congress and keep good things coming in for Guam, we need to elect competent people. We need to elect people who can articulate Guam's case, who can go on there and passionately fight for our island and make our island proud. Make our island proud with the level of representation that they're able to deliver. And really, in this election, there's really only one choice for that, and that is Congresswoman Ginger Cruz. We made a bid for the office, but the people of Guam have elected her in the primary, and we're supporting her this primary. Congressman James Moylan is grossly unfit for the position. He cannot articulate well. I mean, it's even on social media. If you look up some of his YouTube videos, you got people from other parts of the country commenting on how poorly he's doing when it comes time to speak up on our behalf. And then there are all the losses that we've suffered in just the last couple of years. So many setbacks, a complete reversal of fortunes. We went from all this really great stuff and so much momentum to now us having, fallen so far behind. So go into the voting booth, vote your conscience. But as for me, my conscience tells me it's clear. We cannot re-elect James Moylan. I'm supporting Ginger Cruz, and I'm asking you to do so as well. Thank you so much, Guam. God bless. See you soon.
If Guam can't stem the tide of growing and intergenerational poverty, our already challenged lives will have a bleak outlook. We asked Ginger Cruz questions about poverty and the marginalized, and here's what she had to say to you.
I want to move on to the topic of poverty and the marginalized in our community.
Right.
There are so many people in our island who live without water, wastewater, and power infrastructure, wherever it is that they live, whether it's the Gilboa-Zigobri subdivisions,
Yep.
or squatting in Swamp Road, or just really anywhere where there's an issue getting infrastructure. What kind of, if you were to be our congresswoman, how are you going to get us either the federal support, the federal funding, or some kind of financing opportunity, if this matters to you, to get that infrastructure into these lands?
So that is a symptom of a huge systemic problem that we have on the island, right? And there's a lot of things that go into that. The first thing that we need to do is we need to have accurate data. Now, I know that sounds really geeky and people are like, oh, why is she talking about data?
It's foundational to federal funding, isn't it?
If you don't have the right data, you cannot argue for and get the things that Guam needs. And right now, we know, like you and I know, that you should not be paying this much for groceries and gas and housing. We know this. Anybody can tell us that, right? But if you can't just go to a federal agency or go to Congress and go, we're paying way more than you. You need to have the data. And every single time, there must be like a dozen GAO reports that have said there's no data. And that's disadvantaging Guam because we can't make that argument, right? So one of the key things that we need to do, and this is totally fixable.
Okay.
We need to go into Congress and we need to figure out, and work with the executive branch too, because those two things go hand in hand. You can't just go into Congress and create laws because who carries out the law? The executive branch. So you've got to actually start with the executive branch, have conversations, understand what you need to do to gather the data. Because here's an example for you. You know when they did the last census of Guam back in 2020?
Middle of the pandemic.
In the middle of the pandemic, they were calculating all the people that were on the island. At the time, we were about 3 years into the beginning of the military buildup, which means you had a whole bunch of civilian contractors who were making a lot of money, who came to Guam, were renting places, were living around, and they got scooped up by the census takers. So that fed into the data. So when you're looking at the actual poverty rates and you're looking at what people were reporting, the number that we came up with in our census from 2020 is actually skewed.
Because of the artificial.
Because it's an artificial analysis. And because Guam is so intertwined with the military buildup, you can't come up with an accurate assessment of what is going on outside the fence versus the spillover from the military buildup. So it's things like that that we have to fix, because our Medicaid reimbursements, our community development block grants, all of these things are based on numbers, understanding what truly is the case. So that's one part of it, right?
Okay.
The second part of it is really carving out a unique way for Guam to be addressed. People say that being an unincorporated territory is a disadvantage. They say, oh, we don't have the status. We're not like Saipan's a Commonwealth, so they can get things and we can't. I see it as an advantage because it also means we can define what we want to do. There's no actual definition, so we can help to shape that definition and update it. And so one of the key messages in my platform is let's move Guam out from under the Department of Interior move it up to the White House so that we get the White House's attention. Let's get the data and let's have some actual studies, because the number of homeless people on our island, the number of people that can't afford what they need, the number of people who for some reason are not able to get the federal benefits, SNAP assistance or Medicaid assistance, that should be taken care of in the allotments that we get. And those people should not have to sleep on the streets and have
So we can get more federal funding if our data is more reflective of the realities.
If our data is more reflective, and if we have more of a say in how to more fairly and accurately determine what is the allotment that Guam should get. We shouldn't just get it according to our numbers. We shouldn't get it based on an analysis of data from the census. The states actually have an annual update that they do. They don't even do that for Guam.
I'm sure you've heard Mike Nicholas's challenge to your White House proposal. His concerns that if we transfer it from DOI into White House oversight, that we might lose a whole bunch, or we might lose Section 30 funding. Have you looked into that concern? Is there anything you can say to allay his concern?
Yeah, no, and I wouldn't have made the recommendation to move us if I hadn't have spoken to several people in Washington, D.C. So there's a bunch of policy folks that I had worked with at Housing and Urban Development and several other agencies, and they're part of my network.
Okay.
I've known them for 20 years. So when I come up with these ideas, I also run it by them. I'm like, does this make sense? And they're familiar with Puerto Rico, they're familiar with the other territories. And the two issues are not linked at all. So the Section 30 funds would continue, right? The one change that we're looking at making would be something that would have to be studied. It would be done in phases. The first thing we do is work with the White House and have them put together an office sort of at the direction of the president, and then work with them and look at it and see what made the most sense before we started to look at what exactly we would change in the law to then permanize that or make that happen, right? But we would not lose anything from it. And I think, to the contrary, every federal study I've ever seen, be it from the Congressional Research Service or from RAND or from the GAO, they all are literally saying in the recommendations, if you read between the lines, Guam is not in the right space at the Department of Interior. Interior has the smallest budget. Interior has the least ability to engage with other federal agencies. And just by moving it up to the Executive Office of the President, not only gives that ability for them to reach down into these other agencies, but the Executive Office of the President also has the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. And that's where the budgets are created. And the beauty of that is, think about this, Troy. The Congress is having a terrible time with budgets. We all know that, right? They won't introduce a bill unless you find somebody else to take the money away from if you want to increase the budget.
So you want to get us in on the ground floor?
Get us in on the ground floor. So before the budget even comes into the Congress, why don't we start having discussions with OMB and saying, hey, Guam, there's 20,000 people that need SSI. It's not a huge number. We de-link from Puerto Rico. We work with OMB, we get data to support it and go, we need SSI on Guam. And we work with OMB, and if we can convince somebody on the executive side that it made sense,
you get it in the presidential budget request.
Exactly, and it would be a whole lot easier. Now, there might need to be an authorization that came from Congress in order for that to happen. But working in tandem, I think, is a great strategy that could overcome a Congress that everybody sees is having challenges with a lot of these things.
So you're saying that if we needed some sort of direct funding for water, wastewater, power infrastructure, and my next question is about mass transit systems, because it's another big problem that affects people under the poverty line and our ability to get to work and school, and not school, but the doctor's office and the bank and all that. Is that also something you'd be willing to explore, is direct funding to get us some kind of mass transit system that's reliable?
So mass transit makes a lot of sense from the policy standpoint. And I've talked to people about this. All of these issues are ones that I've grappled with. The challenge with mass transit is because we are so small and because there's so few people at the end of the day that would be using it. You'll notice there's really no mass transit in any rural area. all the successful mass transit
Are in cities.
systems are in big cities where there's millions of people. And so it makes sense. It costs $1, you go from here to there. When you start to get out to the rural areas, the cost of running something that's going to provide enough of a network for people with different, times of work and different locations, it just starts to bog down. And it gets so incredibly expensive that at the end of the day, it's not necessarily feasible. So then, rather than just saying no or dismissing it out of hand, there's all these new things that they've got nowadays, though. And if you think about it, in the old days, people used to talk about it in Chuk, how if somebody wanted to get from here to there, they would take a bike. And it wasn't necessarily their bike. They'd see a bike.
Okay.
They'd go and take it to the next area and they'd leave it. And then the person there would say, oh, there's the bike. And they'd take it and they'd take it to the next area. Traditional, old school, right? Well, nowadays you have ride shares, ride apps. They've got these cars that different people can use. You can use your cell phone. You can use, they could be small, economical electric cars.
I've seen the scooters on the sides of the road.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's lots of other options. I agree with you. It's too expensive for everybody to buy a car and the gas and to, the maintenance, all of that. And so for a lot of families, that's difficult. So we need to come up with a solution that will help people get around without having to own a car. But on that one, I would say some of the challenges are that it could end up being too expensive and very difficult to maintain.
During the Calvo administration, I was in the Calvo administration, so I know this. We screwed up with Obamacare. Mm-hmm. And so there are certain portions of the Affordable Care Act that don't apply to Guam.
Right.
Can you fix that as Congresswoman? Can you get us universal health coverage where pre-existing conditions won't matter? Talk to us about that. But there's a significant gap that we have here.
There is.
Middle-class people who don't have health coverage.
Yeah. So there are a lot of challenges with Obamacare on Guam because you have to go to the local marketplace, right? That's the concept of Obamacare. And again, we're talking about the tyranny of distance, right? We're out here in the Pacific and we have to have our own system. And a lot of the challenges that I understood from trying to apply the Obamacare model on Guam related to the fact that we're a smaller market, there's a limited number of insurance companies, and we couldn't necessarily do that. So revisiting that, I think, is certainly something that can be done.
Okay.
But I think something that makes more sense potentially is the question of Medicare. So again, that's more for retirees, right? But there are some things which could be near term and looked at, which might be options where, like, let's say somebody works for GovGuam and the private sector. The quarters that they work for the private sector won't carry over to a GovGuam benefit and vice versa, right? So trying to find ways to buy in and find federal programs such as Medicare, which could help older residents, I think might be one way to help some of the residents on Guam be able to do that. But then I think that the government of Guam is actually looking at a universal healthcare option. And I think if there are federal ways to underwrite that or support that or ensure that it succeeds, we would definitely be open to that.
Would it be a priority of yours?
So a priority of mine is the healthcare issue. Lots of things that we need to do, bring in more money for our hospital, expand the options, have more doctors available, and start to look at more of a unified approach to healthcare so that we have doctors that are available for everybody on the island. Health insurance, I think, would be sort of after we get the healthcare system working, then absolutely health insurance would certainly be on there.
Thank you for being very direct with that answer. Not a politician's answer. Thank you. I appreciate that. We have perverse incentives with our SNAP program, where you just so many people have refused pay raises in GovGuam or in the private sector promotions.
Yes.
Because if they take the $1.62 an hour promotion, they're going to lose a whole lot more in SNAP benefits, and it's not affordable for them.
Right.
Is there something that you can do as Congresswoman to fix that perverse incentive? Maybe like institute, if it's just for Guam or if it's for the whole nation, I don't know. Something like if you get a pay raise today, you won't have an adjustment in your benefits for 6 months or a year. Give people time to adjust to their new realities.
I've thought about that one a lot. And I'm extremely hopeful, and the numbers are looking good, that the Democrats are going to take the majority in the House. And I think that would really be a significant help, especially for the people of Guam, and especially in areas where we are taking care of the working class and of those in poverty. I absolutely think that the cliff that you have, so if you're not making any money, you have support. And then the minute that you try and get off public assistance and you try and do something,
you're penalized.
You drop off the cliff and you're penalized.
Yeah.
And it's those critical first years
Yeah.
when young families or those struggling are trying to get over that hump so that they can start to eventually make enough money that they can afford things on their own. I think that a problem is that cliff. Like if you make up to a certain number, they cut you off completely. I think there is an absolute opportunity, and I know the Democrats are talking about this on the Hill, about creating options where it's a sliding scale, where you lift people up when you reward people for getting a job and starting to make money, and you give them
Which was the whole point.
Right, and you give them enough help to where they can continue to try and earn more and more until you take the training wheels off and they can go on their own. And I think this is something that nationally needs to be looked at. Catherine Clark is a person who I think takes this very seriously. She's the #2 ranking Democrat out of Massachusetts. It's an issue that she's looked at along with childcare issues. And I think it's something that the Democrats would definitely take up.
When we come back, we'll ask Ginger Cruz about ways she can bring more resources and opportunities to our island.
There are natural politicians, and then there are those like me, who aren't political at all. The kind who just want to serve because our people are in need. I'll take on the system and fix what's broken, because improving our quality of life is the reason I'm running. I'm Sabrina Salas Matanani, and I'll give it my all as your senator. Please vote for me. Thank you.
I'm Sabrina Salas Matanani, and I approve this message.
Honor, courage, commitment. This is the foundation of Vince Borja's life. Vince is a soldier, an officer, a combat veteran. After surviving a traumatic childhood, Vince joined the Army and dedicated his life to fighting for freedom, putting himself in harm's way during 3 tours in Iraq. Vince is battle-tested by life and by war. He will bring honor, discipline, and order to a legislature in disarray. Vote Vince Borja for senator. Strength and honor.
My name is Vince Borja, and I approve this message.
From restoring pet air service to bridging east and west through a Guamanian corridor of unprecedented opportunity, Ginger Cruz answers our questions about bringing help and resources to Guam.
There is, we have so many victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, elderly abuse, even things like wrongful prosecution, police corruption, and so many victims of these varied problems that we have in this island. Not enough supports, definitely not enough social workers, not enough places, not enough sanctuary homes for victims of domestic violence, people who are scared. What kind of resources can you bring if elected into Congress so that we can supplement what we have now with something that's adequate, at least?
That is another area that you are seeing movement on the national stage. And it's carving out something that really is tailored for Guam and ensuring that we get a huge portion of that in order to support the people here. One of the first things we need to do is we need to ensure that mental health and those kinds of protections are treated with the same seriousness as physical health. People go get a physical all the time. They require physicals before you get a job. But mental health is always treated as sort of a secondary issue,
Or with bad stigma.
Exactly, with stigma. Mental health issues need to be incorporated so that wellness doesn't just mean you're physically well. It means that you're mentally well. And I think that is one major step where health insurance, where available programs, where the amount of money that we are putting into hospitals, which take care of your physical health, is starting to get matched by the amount of money we put into mental health, because both issues are incredibly important. So that's number one. Number two, I think a lot of it's driven by drugs. So we have water borders. Either it comes in by airplane or it comes in by boat. There is no other option. Or it comes in by the Postal Service, domestic mail, right? Our borders are controlled by the federal government. The Postal Service is controlled by the federal government. That squarely falls on the Congress. The Congress, and it's not just Guam. I am sure I could find like-minded congressmen and women who would totally agree with the fentanyl crisis exploding across the United States, and everyone knows it comes through the domestic mail system. And I know that there are sniffers that are now created. A lot of private sector uses it, DOD uses it, where you can actually detect it in the mail and it doesn't slow anything down. We need to do that. We need to stop that influx. And I think when we do, we also need to increase the number of professionals that is available to help counsel folks and to be able to build a wellness culture. I know the behavioral health folks are doing everything that they can, but they're strained for resources. And we need to create more resources, both locally by training them up and attracting folks, not just from the mainland, but we need to also work on the immigration and on the certifications so that we can start to recruit some from Asia, from the Philippines, from Korea, just people that are high quality counselors in social work in order to help train and get our social workers in Guam to the point that they can provide that support for people. But it is a critical issue, I believe.
We have an affordable housing, I want to call it a crisis.
It is a crisis.
Okay? Because you look at the MLS when you're trying to rent a home and you're going to see one of two prices, $2,205 a month or $2,450 a month. Homes that used to run for $180,000 a year just 10, 12 years ago are now running for $350,000 to $450,000 a year. We can't afford to live in Guam. And one of the solutions that has been proffered is to switch how the military treats its housing allowance here, from overseas housing allowance to base housing allowance. I've been told that literally takes an act of Congress. Tell us more about this and if you're willing to make that change or fight for that change.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's so much fighting. I think really the military had this moment where they had this shift to Indo-PACOM, right? Happened 2019. It was sort of a sudden move when all of a sudden national security interest pivoted to Guam and everything started to happen. And it happened right in the middle of COVID. So a lot of things weren't completely thought through. And so the idea of rushing people out here, getting ready, being prepared for this 2027 anticipated act by the Communist Party of China to sort of, have a point in time when they want to be able to challenge the rest of the world. It happened fast. And I don't believe Guam was fully prepared in Washington to sit down with DOD, go through all of these issues and discuss what we needed out of all of this. We didn't even foresee what some of these issues would be. On the issue of housing, there's a lot of things that can be done. Number one, the housing allotments, right, can be brought down because they are distorting the market.
Super.
And at the same time, the Department of Defense is issuing contracts willy-nilly, hundreds of millions of dollars, that are resulting in scores of contractors coming into the island, and they're snapping up all the housing and paying whatever the market, because they're just going to bill it back to the federal government. That is also distorting, and it's locking out homes. So the local population is locked out of renting or buying because it's being bought by companies because they need to put their contractors in it.
And the homeowners would rather rent to the military contractors and to the military because they're going to get the money.
Exactly. And as a result, we have several problems simultaneously. Number one, the prices are distorted. Number two, we just don't have the housing stock.
Yeah.
we don't have enough housing. We're short about 9,000 housing units today, as I sit here. 9,000 people out there need a home. They're stuck in a home maybe with their parents, maybe they're forced to live, with other people. They don't necessarily want to, but they can't find something that they can afford.
And can you imagine, what if the 7,000 or I don't know how many thousands of people who left Guam, what if they hadn't left Guam?
Exactly.
And what happens when they're repatriated, when they move back home?
Right. So all of
you
these
see
things,
this problem.
completely, in detail, and I've really looked at it. And again, I worked at Housing and Urban Development.
That's right.
We had all sorts of projects, right? And a lot of the things that we were doing at the time was we were doing mixed use housing, because we don't just want to talk affordable housing. We want to talk accessible. We want to talk housing for all of the different types of people on the island, because the middle class needs homes too. It's just not there, right? So we need housing for folks that are barely able to afford it. And then we need also housing for young families starting out. And then we need housing for people that have a good job, that want to find a house, that can probably afford a decent rent. They just can't find that housing. So the first thing we need to look at is working with DoD to get them to help with the infrastructure, because the infrastructure is one of the ones that's most difficult. So there was a study that was done a while back, and they said if they were going to put together, I think it was $55 million just to put the sewer in, if they wanted to do a subdivision for, I think it was 400 houses or something like that. If you divide that out just for the sewage, you wouldn't be able to build homes that would then become affordable, right? So we do need the military's help. So we could leverage this moment, because the military needs the housing for the people it is bringing here to do the military buildup. Once the military buildup is done, because at a certain point it's going to be built, right? Those people will move off, and then we'll transition into the maintenance of everything, which is a much smaller number. So in that short term, what about getting the Department of Defense to help out putting in infrastructure, and maybe even helping a little bit with some of the construction, getting Gov Guam, find available land. Does GURA have available land, or land trust, right? Start looking at places where we could put housing with significant federal infrastructure and investment, with the understanding that if it's used for the military buildup, at the end of the time that it's being used, it gets turned over to the government of Guam and becomes available, hundreds and thousands of units maybe even, becomes available, spruced up, refurbished, and then used for local families, and build a variety of different types of housing, so you can have all the different income levels, right? So there's a lot of things that we can think about. We need to first bring down the distorted rents that are being caused by the military buildup. In the very, very short term, if the military issues a contract, one of the ideas I had was we could talk to them and say, if you're going to come in and you're going to distort the markets, then the contractor has to pay a certain amount of like a fee or an offset, because they know they're going to hurt the market. And that offset could go into a fund that would then be able to provide down payments for families to help make housing more affordable, right? You could start to come up with some public policy solutions so that we can help families, because maybe a family can afford the monthly, they just can't come up with the down payment, right? So there are all these policy things we could do, but at the base level, Troy, we need more houses. So we've got to have public-private partnerships. We've got to have investment incentives to bring companies to Guam, either from the States or from the region in Asia, to build more units that are attractive, that are not only the low range to the mid range, the whole arc of housing, so that families can find, and single people who want to leave home and they graduated from UOG, great, mom, I'm going to strike out on my own and get my own place, right? We need that type of housing available. That's something that's going to take time. And that is why I think it's really important to have a plan when you run for Congress, because not everything takes 2 years. And if you don't have a plan and you don't have sort of a long-term goal of where you want to go and a blueprint for how to get there, you're just going to do 2 years and it's going to be like Groundhog Day. And then everything's going to get thrown away and then you start all over again, because that's how Congress is. So I have a plan with certain things that I think would really help. And some of these things are going to take longer, and some of them can be done pretty quickly. And we need to lay them all out on the table. work between the local government, the federal government, and the private sector, and just start knocking the list off and figuring out what we can do.
Thank you. I want to move on to the topic of bringing help and resources into Guam. So what can we do, whether it's a change to cabotage or otherwise, in order to bring in more competition for air and sea passenger and cargo services so that we reduce costs in a big way, not just for us to travel, not just so that tourists can afford to come here, but also more than 90% of everything we consume comes in through the seaport. And so what can be done?
So the first thing that we can do is we can mentally give ourselves a reorientation and understand that we are America in Asia. That's an old saying. People are like, oh, that was a really old saying, but we really are. We are 3 to 4 hours flying time from Korea, Japan, the Philippines. And as I say to people, when you look at Don Don Donki, when they opened, prices kind of came down on a few things because they have ships that come from Japan, that come from Asia. They put supplies on it and they bring it into Guam.
They have the cheapest laundry detergent, by the way, just FYI.
And that provides competition, right? So that competition helps bring prices down. But this idea that we always have to look to the mainland, and how long does it take to get things from the mainland? The mainland is 5,000 miles away. And the cost of gas, the fact that, American shipping also requires you to have energy efficient fuel and all of these other things, it drives the cost up. 20 years ago, there wasn't a huge supply of goods and services from Asia, so of course we went to the mainland. But today, the same companies, Procter & Gamble, or the same food suppliers, the same everything, they're producing, they have factories all throughout Asia. And so if we start to look more to Asia as a balance, we still need things from the States, but we also want to have that balance between the two. The competition brings prices down. The closer shipping lines brings prices down. But we still have one fundamental problem, and this is the same problem for both the air and the sea. The biggest problem we have is there's only 170,000 people on Guam, so there's no demand. You can't fill up a whole entire ship with all the shipping containers just for Guam, because our demand just isn't there. That's the reason you can't find a Coca-Cola if you go to Pohnpei, because there's just not the demand. But if you start to think about this, Guam is America's most prominent point in the Pacific. And in all the national strategies, it says America is a Pacific power. So if America is a Pacific power, it needs to project itself from Guam and the CNMI, right? So how do you project yourself? You become the center of trade, of movement. If you took the 170,000 people on Guam, and you don't just take the Western Pacific, Palau, Epicem, Marshalls, you break those artificial barriers and you look at the Pacific as a whole. The PIF members, right? Tonga, Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, New Caledonia, American Samoa. You've got 2 American territories and you can't even have a direct flight from one to the other. You have to go through Hawaii. It takes you a day and a half, costs you thousands of dollars. If you start to look at the Pacific as a whole, there's 2 million people that are consuming things. And if America is going to be a Pacific power in the future, and we create a hub and spoke system, where goods from Asia, goods from the mainland, come in through major hubs. Guam, maybe American Samoa, maybe Hawaii. Let's keep it all, and CNMI, keep it all on US land. And then you break it down into smaller components, where you have smaller ships that are able to make it into these small ports. You have smaller aircraft, 120 seaters, much cheaper on the fuel. You could run them more frequently. They're easier to maintain, right? And you start to hub and spoke. Again, this is a long-term vision, but you start to hub and spoke it. And it's already starting. You see Air Nauru. Air Nauru is starting to do these smaller routes, right? And they're taking us down to Australia. If we start to lay the groundwork and we have air and sea connections more frequent, connecting all of the Pacific, you start to create an opportunity to do something that was done in Europe. Think about Europe, go all the way back. France, Germany, Spain, Italy, they were all independent countries until they created the EU. And when they created the EU, they dropped some of the barriers, they all started to trade with each other, and financially they rose because they all started to collectively buy and sell and move things around. Imagine doing something similar in the Pacific, where all of the different islands in the Pacific are serviced through hubs and spokes that are America, and that would be America projecting its commercial power.
Because the CCP already understands this
Exactly.
projection of power.
It does.
And the CCP has been going shopping around the Pacific, buying up properties,
Getting involved
investing
in ports.
in governments, getting involved in ports. Yeah.
Setting up businesses. So if we start to do that, then the benefit for Guam is all of a sudden we become more of an aggregator. So we can get a lot more goods and services because it's not just us. We would be then redistributing it throughout the region. We gain more jobs as a transshipment point. More international companies would want to set up a branch in Guam. So more of our young people who graduated from UOG, College of Business and Public Administration, could get executive jobs with private sector in order to manage these things. And you'd have more economic activity. You'd have lower airfares. You'd have people able to move by air and by sea a lot easier. And you'd have the flow of goods and services. And you'd also have 2 million people consuming things. Now, there's a lot of barriers to that, and that's sort of a long-term vision.
Sure.
That might take 20 years. But with that vision, you could see a long-term opportunity for Guam that is not dependent on tourism, which we have to bolster tourism, but we also need to strengthen that. And so how do we do that? We need other reasons to have air and sea coming in and out so that our tourists benefit from the lower costs.
I think you might have just answered my next question, but I'm going to pose it anyway in case there's anything you wanted to add to it,
All
which
right.
was essentially, how are we going to attract the doctors, nurses, specialty medical providers, other technicians, lawyers, construction workers, social workers, therapists, psychologists, all these things, all these people, these professionals who we need to better our island. How are we going to attract them? But you may have already answered this question, but go ahead.
So many of these people are from Guam that have left, and they're doing these professions in the States or in the region, and we want to bring them back. And it all goes back to the basics. It goes back to the dialysis center that now sits in the formerly abandoned building that we've not been able to get going. We have to fundamentally fix our economy. And the things that hold our economy back, a lot of it has to do with the rules and regulations that make everything more expensive.
Or protectionist policy.
Protectionist policies. Policies that were created for the continental United States that make no sense in Guam. Everything from agriculture to, you name it. Policies don't really fit us. And so it's tackling them one by one and making them work so that we can get our healthcare system up to where we need it for our people. So we can get our education system back on track to where we need it. And when we have a thriving economy with good jobs and healthcare and education system, it will naturally be a virtuous cycle. You will naturally see more doctors want to come and practice. But doctors are not going to want to come and practice at a hospital that's struggling. And it's struggling because too many people are needing that healthcare, and we're not being able to get the reimbursements or the payments or the things that it needs to properly function. And we also just need that new hospital built. So if we can get over these hurdles, and from the perspective of Congress, address the policy issues that stop that from happening, which again, long-term, big vision, lots of hard work. But if we don't do it, Troy, nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
It's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
So we have to do it. So I say we need to start now.
I'm going to ask you a question that I know no one's asked you yet.
Okay.
I know a bunch of these questions haven't been asked yet, but this one definitely hasn't been asked yet.
Okay.
I'm a big pet lover.
Oh.
But this also, I'll give you a practical example.
Okay.
The chief medical examiner, I think he might have left already, but the one
He
that we
did.
hired,
Yeah.
he almost didn't come here because we don't have pet air service. He couldn't bring his dogs to
I
Guam.
know.
So he spent a whole lot of his own money so that he could bring his dogs to Guam.
Right.
What can you do as Congresswoman to incentivize the airlines to resume pet air service?
So
I know this is not,
yeah,
you know,
no, it's important. I have, trust me, I have a poodle, so this is important.
What's your poodle's name?
Zoe.
Hi, Zoe. Can I meet Zoe?
Zoe is adorable.
I love her already.
Zoe is the cheapest stress relief that you could ever have. She's amazing. No, it's ridiculous, frankly. And I think, if you rank and stack all the things that we need to do for Guam, I think the first thing we need to do is take all the things that fall into the ridiculous category, right? Our housing prices are ridiculous.
Yeah.
Cost of living is ridiculous. The fact that we can't get more help for our hospitals, ridiculous. The fact that we lost Compact Impact money and haven't been able to get that back, ridiculous, right? Not being able to get a pet, to get on an airplane, falls into the ridiculous category. We have to fix that. I have not spent time with the policy folks that I've been talking to yet discussing that. I am sure there is a policy answer to it. Part of the answer is when you only have a monopoly and you only have one business that is servicing Guam on these major routes, then you're stuck because you have to go by their corporate policies. Yeah. When you start to create competition, people will vote with their pocketbooks. And if there was another option that did allow pets, people would start to use that option, and then the first company would look back at their policies and say, gee, if we want more people to fly our air, we might have to give them the opportunity to bring their pets back and forth. So I'm sure that's something that can be done, and I would certainly look into it.
The promise of the Guamanian dream and the vision Ginger Cruz has for uplifting all who call Guam home transcends racial, gender, and other prejudices that linger. When we come back, she talks to us about improving our social and political fabric.
As we move forward in this election, as we contemplate who we're going to be supporting, it's so important that if we're going to maintain this level of effectiveness in the Congress and keep good things coming in for Guam, we need to elect competent people. We need to elect people who can articulate Guam's case, who can go on there and passionately fight for our island and make our island proud. Make our island proud with the level of representation that they're able to deliver. And really, in this election, there's really only one choice for that, and that is Congresswoman Ginger Cruz. We made a bid for the office, but the people of Guam have elected her in the primary, and we're supporting her this primary. Congressman James Moylan is grossly unfit for the position. He cannot articulate well. I mean, it's even on social media. If you look up some of his YouTube videos, you have people from other parts of the country commenting on how poorly he's doing when it comes time to speak up on our behalf. And then there are all the losses that we've suffered in just the last couple of years. So many setbacks, a complete reversal of fortunes. We went from all this really great stuff and so much momentum to now us having, fallen so far behind. So go into the voting booth, vote your conscience. But as for me, my conscience tells me it's clear. We cannot re-elect James Moylan. I'm supporting Ginger Cruz, and I'm asking you to do so as well. Thank you so much, Guam. God bless. See you soon.
From transparency to the Chamorro language to migrants, the military buildup, and even a question about what she would do if she were the governor, Ginger Cruz talks to us about social and political issues.
I want to move on to the topic of social and political issues.
Okay.
There is an interview I watched recently of Archbishop Brian Jimenez with an Australian Catholic journalist. It was conducted in Rome. And during the interview, he referred to himself, he said, I want to face a reality here. And I can't remember what year they were talking about, but it's just what he said that carries with me. He said, I'm an outsider. He referred to himself as an outsider in Guam. He's our Archbishop now. And I couldn't help, and I see what he's saying. He just moved to Guam from Saipan. Right? But I still felt bad, and I wanted to reach out to him, and I wanted to hug him and say, "No, you're a Guamanian now." So, but I have to imagine that he is not the only person living in Guam who feels that way. And so, how do we break through that thinking, and how can your congressional office make people realize and people feel that they are part of this island and they are worthy of your office's representation as equally as anyone else in this island.
So I always describe Guam as a fiesta plate. What makes us delicious is the fact that you have so many different cultures all intertwined to make us who we are today. And even people who are very, very proud of the cultural heritage that they come from, if you were to go back through their cultural heritage, I'd say, 3 generations, you'd find some mixing in there of different cultures, right? It is about society itself. It is the point in time that we raise a generation where we embrace and understand each other as people and stop having the question of, well, what are you? What is your background? Check the box on this form. You're either, in the old days, it was like one, right? You're either this or this. Finally, you're starting to see, okay, are you mixed? But you have to define which ones. Well, how many generations do you want to go back? Now they've got DNA tests and people are taking DNA tests and it shows you the, 18 different countries that places that you came from. But why are we so dividing when we look at things, when in fact, the need is to look at society as a whole and to say, how do we progress as a society, as one Guam, Guamanians, and provide the same kind of opportunity to people across the board? And I don't know if we're really heading there, because I think the national discourse lately has really not helped.
Yeah.
The national discourse,
It's pretty bad.
which has become oversensitized to race and just randomly throwing, racial accusations or threats or whatever. When I was growing up, those were going away. You didn't say those things. And nowadays, it's almost just sort of come back. And I think we need to get beyond that, because in Guam, it's always about Inafamaulik. I mean, at some level, people on Guam understand that we're all here because we want Guam to succeed. We want our families to succeed. We want to succeed. And the more we can succeed in harmony, the easier everything's going to be. So I can tell you right now, my congressional office, the constituent services that we would have would serve anybody who was on Guam. It would not matter what their background was. And if they had some issue where they were being discriminated against because of their sexual preference or because of their race or because of the fact that they just moved to Guam or because of the fact that they've been here forever and they're not being listened to, or the fact that their culture is being disrespected, those things have to be overcome. And that's something that each of us can do. The fact that they don't teach civics as much in school breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about the math and the science. It's about treating each other with respect, having different opinions, and not just classifying people and then accusing people just because of their race that you're doing something. One of the best examples is the Micronesian community. We're at a generation where you've got multi-generational US residents who were born here, grew up here. And okay, maybe their background happens to be from an island in the FSM. Why is that relevant?
It's not.
They're Guamanian.
Yeah.
And they are a part of everything that we're doing. Now, somebody who comes in, there's good people and bad people. If someone's a criminal, they're a criminal. You deal with that because they're a criminal.
Because they're a criminal, not because of their
Not
background,
because of their race or their background or anything else about them. And it's so funny because, the American ideals of all men are created equal, we live under those rules. The Guamanian and Chamorro concepts of Inafamaulik and family and openness.
It's a gathering together.
All of these things, right, exists. But at the same time, if you get on the anonymous internet and you read some of this stuff, it just makes your stomach turn.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't help anybody. And when children see that, they learn that. And then as they grow up, they carry those values which I don't believe are values that we want our children to continue to
They're certainly
pursue.
not virtues. They are absolute vices.
There are not. So I just, that's another reason why we need more people in politics who don't do that, who do not divide people by their race or ask them that. I don't talk about it not because I hide it or not because it's not relevant. If somebody is a daughter of Guam and they love this island and they know it so well and they want to fight for it, it doesn't matter who they are. If they are Chuukese or if they are Filipino, if they are Chamorro, or if they're Haole. Sorry I used the term, but growing up, that was what we said. If they're Caucasian, it doesn't matter. They contributed, they learned, and if their heart is in the right place, everything else is really
irrelevant.
Something that divides, and it's irrelevant. Yeah.
The next time you see Archbishop Jimenez, just give him a hug and say, "You're one of us now, buddy."
I will.
It does not matter.
I know. I know.
Is there federal funding opportunity? Let's say the superintendent of education wants to ratchet up the Chamorro language immersion program. He wants all of the kids in the schools to learn Chamorro. By the time they graduate, they're fluent. But he needs funds for it. He needs to hire more teachers and train more teachers. Is there a federal funding opportunity for that?
I think the federal funding opportunities for those things are fading fast.
Okay.
And I think that there are several court cases that were, and again, I'm not trying to divide, but I am talking about the difference in the political parties.
Okay.
The Republican Party has really spent a lot of time developing a list of judicial appointments that have reshaped courts all across the nation. And those courts, as they have gotten more conservative, have had rulings such as affirmative action rulings that have eliminated a lot of the protections or support for minorities. As a result, as I sit here today, 8A contracting used to be a vehicle which supported disadvantaged, socially disadvantaged minorities, gave them an extra push because they traditionally had not had that help, to help them to create a company, give them a little bit of an edge, gave them 8 years to figure it out so that they could, compete with other companies. That's fundamentally changed because once that affirmative action court case came down, it opened it up. And did you know now that somebody who is a Caucasian male from California who comes in can claim socially disadvantaged and can try and get an 8A certification for a company?
Oh, I did not know that.
It is not about minorities any longer.
Okay.
And so there is this fight, and the argument, it is this argument, the same argument that was used against Guam trying to go after self-determination, where somebody said, you're disenfranchising me from voting, even though they'd been here like a minute, and all of a sudden they wanted to vote on Guam's decolonization vote. There are more and more of those types of decisions that are being made. So we have to get very creative in how we find funding and support in order to preserve and protect and lift up the native language and the native culture of Guam.
Okay.
And we don't always have to go to the federal government. So one of the things that we can do is we can expand grant opportunities because there are so many grants that are not federal government grants. There are private sector grants, there are regional grants.
Okay.
There are opportunities to get funding that are not always federal. That is what I want to look for because I am very concerned that the federal government wants to create a situation where helping women would disadvantage men somehow, or helping minorities somehow disadvantages all the companies that are not minorities. And so we have to look at that and say, how on Guam is that going to affect us? And because it is important to us to preserve and protect and to continue that so that that beautiful, unique part of our island is maintained, we need to continue to do that in an environment which is getting more and more hostile against it.
In the primary election, and I told you this, and I was very honest about it with my audience as a disclosure about a bias that I had, a political bias. I supported your opponent during the primary, Michael C. Nicholas.
Right.
Yet you continue to answer every single one of my questions. You're here on the stage with me today, answering all of my questions.
Right.
Why? I'm curious, why, after knowing that I supported your opponent in the primary election, did you give me the time of day?
When you run for public office, it doesn't matter who is asking you the question.
Okay.
I believe you have a responsibility to answer every question. And you have a news organization that you run, that people listen to. There is an audience that respects you, and I respect you. And if you want to ask me questions, I am open to answering. If any organization out there wants to ask me a question, I am absolutely prepared to answer, because public service is not public service to those you like or those that you favor. Public service means that you are responsible to everybody. And I am just as responsible to you as I am to any voter, whether they agree with me or disagree with me. I have to give an opportunity and a fair chance to everyone to ask me that. And plus, I actually respect the work that you do. So, and I enjoy your media very much.
I appreciate that. I'm going to get back to the topic of transparency in just a second, but I do have a question from former Congressman Mike Nicholas for you. Okay, are we okay with this?
Sure.
Okay. This is from Mr. Nicholas. During my time in Congress, I was one of 6 freshmen to pass a bill in our first year in office, and one of only a handful of Democrats to have a standalone bill signed by a Republican President, Donald Trump, and passed by a Republican Senate. This also just happens to be our war claims bill that finally paid our war claims to our manamko. Many responsible Republicans and independents are interested in supporting you, but unsure about how you would perform if Donald Trump was elected president, and if the Senate were to flip Republican. What reassurances can you give them and all of the people of Guam that you will remain effective regardless of how the presidential or Senate elections turn out?
A very good question, and I thank you for that. I will go back to my history. I worked for Governor Joe Atta at the Bureau of Planning, a Republican. We came up with the first Compact Impact Grant. It was $3 million, and I was extremely proud of that. That was in 1990, working with Peter Leon Guerrero. I also worked for Governor Carl Gutierrez, a Democrat. When I went to the mainland, in 2001, was an appointee in the Clinton administration, which is Democrat. And then in 9/11, when I went to go work at the Pentagon, I was an appointee under the Bush administration. One of the gentlemen that I worked very closely with when I was working in Iraq is a gentleman named Paul Brinkley, who is somebody that I highly respect. He was working on economic development programs. He, I understand, is one of the people on the Donald Trump transition team.
Oh, okay.
And that's just one example. And I'm not just, I give names, not so much to throw names around, but because people go, oh, sure, she knows somebody. But I actually do know many more people, but I'm just giving you one example.
So you have a wide network.
So I have a very, very wide network. And it is not a partisan network. It is one that crosses all the parties, independents, Republicans, Democrats. Whoever is elected president in November, the delegate from Guam has to work across the aisle.
And you believe you can be effective no matter which party?
I absolutely know that I can. Senator Susan Collins from Maine, good friend. We worked very closely when I was at SIGR, is Republican. I mean, there are so many examples of how to do that, but I think it's essential. And that's the beauty of having a non-voting delegate in Guam, is that you're not the deciding vote in some partisan issue. So you actually can cross the aisle to the other side and work together. So I'm 100% committed to do that.
Awesome. Thank you for answering his question.
Absolutely.
We as voters have heard promises and commitments of transparency, and that have not been kept by our current congressman, by our current governor, by several politicians. You've promised transparency. So how and why should voters trust that you're going to remain a transparent person if you're elected?
It's in my nature. The work that I did for so many years was to provide that transparency whenever I was in government. And I really believe it's not that I'm being forced to be transparent. I think the more transparent you are, and the more that the voters of Guam understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it, the easier it is for them to understand where we're all going as an island. I think the fact that I published my platform and I'm continuing to update it, I'm not afraid to put it down in writing. And I know some people may not agree with everything I said, and it doesn't mean that I'm not open to listening and adjusting and incorporating other feedback. But at the same time, I'm also not afraid to say, here's what I'm going to be pursuing.
So you'll keep taking our phone calls and
100%. And I think the whole way through, it's not just the press release. Press releases sometimes are just spin. And I've never found that to be helpful for anybody. I think when you have an agenda that's clear and open, I think when you have that dialogue, town halls. I mean, nobody's had town halls in a while now. Opening up, making yourself available on a regular basis so that people know that anyone on Guam, not only in your office, but also in large group settings, if they need to talk to you, your office is open because you're a public servant. At the end of the day, you're representing the people of Guam. No, you're not representing yourself. And so how can you represent the people of Guam if you're not having a conversation with them? And nowadays, with all of the different avenues in media, there's so many ways for people to send you information, but they want to also hear back. Are you hearing them? How are you incorporating that? How is that affecting your plan? So transparency is just a natural part of what I do, and I am absolutely committed to doing that and always being available to any media or any constituents when they have a question.
On the issue of immigration, migrants, asylum seekers, refugees. Remember when we had to take in, was it 50,000 Kurds? It was
less than that, but I was up at the airport that day to greet the airplane.
Let's say you're the congresswoman and the situation comes about either in Ukraine because of the Russians, or in South Korea because of the North Koreans, or even in Chuk, maybe because in atolls in Chuk because of climate refugees. They need to get away from rising seawaters. And all of these people need to, the US government, the State Department calls you up and says, Congresswoman Cruz, we have 10,000 Ukrainians that need to get out somewhere. We want to bring them to Guam. Or we have 2,000 Chukis that we need to get off of these atolls and bring them into Guam. Well, what will you do? How will you handle something like that?
That happened during the Vietnam War.
Okay.
And I can remember that because I was up in on Torres and those B-52s were rattling our windows, and we had the huge buildup down in Assen, and we had all of those camps because there were people coming in and out. In the case that the federal government, and this would be a federal decision because Guam does not have control over our immigration. When the federal government decides that it is going to utilize land space and infrastructure and resources in order to do something of that nature, the most essential thing that we have to do on our island is make sure that there is no negative impact on the people of Guam. And part of that is getting way ahead of it. Part of it is understanding what's going to happen, what is the impact, properly calculating the impact, and then having a voice. Being a policy person who not only sits at the table and gets the briefing and gets told that, but has the presence of mind to be able to work with them to ensure that we mitigate all of the negative impacts and then find the silver linings that we could then turn to our advantage. So let's say they wanted to come in and they say, something happened in Ukraine, we have 10,000 refugees, they're going to be housed on Guam for a year, we're going to set up a camp. Okay, we negotiate with them. We need affordable housing built. Tell you what, you're going to set up a camp, do it on a portion of the base where you can actually move the fence back, and after you're done using that for a year, that facility can then be turned, and make an agreement with them. That facility can be turned over to the people of Guam, make sure the impact on the water, on the power, on the sewer, on the roads, there is a calculation. We get that money so that we can alleviate any pressure on the local population. And in the long term, it becomes something good for the people of Guam. We always have to make sure that we are there, turning every disadvantage into an opportunity. And it's understanding how to do that. And as long as we're on our toes and we're always there and we're working collaboratively with the federal government, I believe the federal government wants to work collaboratively on all these issues. It's just, they're not there to think about our part. The federal government is there to do what they need to do for their mission. And sometimes I think that our representation in Washington lately thinks that they're going to do Guam's thinking for us. And that is the fallacy. Because we need to do the thinking. We need to say, no. You cannot just go sending a whole bunch of contractors and people to Guam and say, you deal with the fact that you're going to have 40,000 more residents. It doesn't work that way. But the only way that you can start those negotiations with them and go, okay, by the way, I need this much funding in order for us to analyze what the cost, what the analysis is going to be so that we can mitigate all of these issues so you're happy and the people of Guam are happy. And they want us to step up to the table and to do that. So that's a big part of handling those issues, is having a representative in Washington who's not only apprised of the issues, but who has the policy experience to be able to defend Guam's interests and negotiate situations that turn out to be not only not harmful for Guam, but in the long run, potentially beneficial to the people of Guam.
Before we get to the last topic of abortion and reproductive health rights,
Okay.
I want to ask you a kind of fun question.
Okay.
Okay. If you were the governor of Guam, right? Now all the rumors are going to get started after this question. If you were the governor of Guam, what decisions of Governor Lulian Guerrero has made would you have made differently, or what would you pursue that she has not been able to pursue yet?
I will actually challenge the premise of the question.
Okay.
Because every single leader is completely different, and you cannot know all of the inputs that go into a decision. And I will say this much for any political figure on Guam. There's something I taught my students practically day one of my class at the University of Guam. And it is a theory that you can look up on the internet. It's called wicked problems.
Okay.
It's an article from the 70s written by Horst and Riddle. And what it says is, in social sciences, which is politics, which is policy, housing, schools, crime, all of it, there is no solution that is black and white. Every solution is going to have 50-some% of the people agreeing with it and 40-some% of the people, and then it just, the percentages change. But you can never come up with a decision that is going to be the perfect decision or the right decision or make everybody happy. No matter what you do, you can do your best. You could try the hardest and have the smartest people and all the resources. And you'll never come up with a decision because people are all different. And you'll never come up with a decision that makes everybody happy, right? Number one. Number two, government is fundamentally, the definition of government is the distribution of scarce resources. So no matter what you do, you've got $100 to spend and $1,000 worth of problems. That's just the case for the federal government, for the Guam government, for any government in the entire world. You can never have enough money to take care of everything. So that's what government does. You make those hard decisions. Use the money here instead of here. And so if I were to say, I would do this differently.
It would be presumptuous, you're saying.
It would not only be presumptuous, but that $100 is never going to take care of $1,000 worth of problems. Every governor has to decide, where does that $100 go? This is why we have elections. Because then the people who have elected her twice said, you decide for us where that goes. So I think the important thing is that the voters of Guam understand that nobody goes into politics because they hate the people of Guam or want to screw things up or are just set on destroying something. Every single one pretty much goes in saying, I want to try and help. I want to try and solve something.
Do you think that she gets a bad rap from some people just because she's a woman?
I think women still have a much harder time. I can't tell you how many times I feel like somebody's mansplaining something to me, and it's because I'm a woman and we're judged differently. I think it's a whole lot better than it used to be. Okay, I'm going to be 60. I know people don't believe I'm going to be 60, but I am going to be 60. And I was around at a time when women were just starting to break into positions where they could do things just the same as a man could do in different offices. But I do think that women still have a more difficult time. Just look at the presidential race. The standards that are used to judge a man are still different than the standards that are used to judge a woman.
Kamala Harris is being judged by her laugh.
Let's all judge Donald Trump by his laugh. I mean, you know.
No one brings it up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it's a lot better than it used to be. I look at the next generation of women and I see it really getting erased as we watch things move. But we've still got a way to go.
And we're going to talk about that on the other side of this break, or we come to our last segment about abortion and reproductive health rights. And I'm going to ask you to educate me.
Honor, courage, commitment. This is the foundation of Vince Borja's life. Vince is a soldier, an officer, a combat veteran. After surviving a traumatic childhood, Vince joined the Army and dedicated his life to fighting for freedom, putting himself in harm's way during 3 tours in Iraq. Vince is battle-tested by life and by war. He will bring honor, discipline, and order to a legislature in disarray. Vote Vince Borja for senator. Strength and honor.
My name is Vince Borja, and I approve this message.
There are natural politicians, and then there are those like me, who aren't political at all. The kind who just want to serve because our people are in need. I'll take on the system and fix what's broken, because improving our quality of life is the reason I'm running. I'm Sabrina Salas-Matanani, and I'll give it my all as your senator. Please vote for me. Thank you.
I'm Sabrina Salas-Matanani, and I approve this message.
Ginger Cruz became emotional as I provided a long preface to my question on abortion. And my question wasn't standard. I asked her to educate me about this lightning rod topic.
I've considered myself, and I've only really seen things in the light of pro-life versus pro-choice, and I consider myself pro-life since I was 16 years old. And I haven't vacillated on that position. About 2 years ago, the Supreme Court rolled back Roe v. Wade with a decision called Dobbs, right? And now we're seeing the practical effects of implementation of Dobbs, or more specifically, more southern states that have implemented abortion regulation in their states because Dobbs said that that's what can happen. Because Dobbs said, in an interview I had with Senator Tom Fisher, who was explaining Dobbs to me, and I'm sure and we talked about you actually, I'll explain that in just, forgive me, I'm gonna be explaining a lot of stuff right now before I get to the question.
Sure.
He explained how Dobbs rolled back Roe v. Wade by saying that there is no implicit right to privacy in the Constitution. And then he explained, he said, if that's the case, and Justice Sotomayor wrote this in her dissent, if that's the case, then that means that people can start challenging other laws, that other Supreme Court cases that were based on this implicit right to privacy, and they include the landmark cases on interracial marriages,
The Love case.
on contraception, on same-sex marriages. And my jaw dropped when he told me about that, right? So that's one. Today, in the New York Times, I read an article, and I'm going to read to you, if you will you bear with me, I'm going to read to you excerpts from this, quotes from people who were interviewed. Here's one. I found that we had an 80 to 90% risk of miscarriage with this pregnancy. And if we didn't miscarry, that he would only survive most likely hours or days after birth. We're in Texas. So I kind of looked at my options here as far as, okay, so if I miscarry, what does that look like? I'm not given any medication as far as like cytotec to help to dilate the cervix and anything like that. They want me to try to let my body pass it on my own. If I end up bleeding too much, I have to come to the ER and wait at the ER. They still can't intervene. It has to become life-threatening. Life-threatening is sepsis, so infection that, causes multi-organ failure. So I understand it like you're not going to intervene. You're not going to step in and do the common sense thing of like, someone's miscarrying. You will have to deliver that dead fetus. That was pretty appalling for me. Here is a doctor who says, I just finished doing a laparoscopic salpingectomy, I'm butchering that, on a young woman, 23 years old, who has not had children and desires not to have children. This is one in a string of many sterilizations I've done on young women without children since SB 8 passed in Texas and Dobbs passed at the level of the Supreme Court. I've had so many patients who don't think that they want children, but ultimately are so scared about the lack of reproductive access that they would rather remove the option than have to deal with an unintended pregnancy. Is this making you tear up? I'm so sorry. It made me tear up when I was reading this morning. An excerpt from the article. Every state that has banned abortion allows for certain exceptions. It's sometimes in the case of rape, incest, or severe fetal abnormalities, and always in life-saving scenarios. But navigating those exceptions is anything but straightforward. Even in clear-cut cases, the specter of criminal charges hangs over every decision. And here is a final one from a Dr. Christy Tomlin, who is a pediatric gynecologist in South Carolina. She said, I've had police threaten to come to my home, and I've had police call my phone and threaten me. As a pro-life advocate since the age of 16, I would never have thought that advocating for the reversal of Roe would have led to the other side of the death culture, and that is the death of women, the death of fetuses, of unborn children as well.
And the mental anguish of some women for their entire lives.
And so I need you to help me here.
Yes.
Okay, because I am at a crossroads.
Yes.
After listening to Senator Fisher, after researching what he sent to me and confirming, validating that what he was telling me was true, after reading this New York Times article, and these are just some of the stories, not all of the stories, I don't see how this hardline pro-life stance continues to be pro-life if so many lives continue to be in danger. But at the same time, I want to protect the lives of unborn children. And so I complained about this in my interview with Senator Fisher. I said, Ginger Cruz keeps saying in these debates where she only has 90 seconds or 2 minutes at the most to talk about this, so she rushes everything through, and she keeps saying something I didn't understand. She keeps saying, they came after our abortion rights, they're gonna come after our reproductive rights. The next thing they're gonna come after is IVF. Then they're gonna come after so and so and so. So Fisher explained it to me, I understand that now, but what I'm wondering, I wanted to give you this opportunity to just explain the whole kit and caboodle and educate me and help me to assuage my conscience, if you can, on this issue.
It's a very divisive issue. And I think
complicated.
And extremely complicated. And I think part of the problem is that it has been dumbed down to two statements. You're either pro-life or you're pro-choice. And pro-choice has become sort of this word that stands for you're a baby killer, which is literally offensive and wrong. And the last thing
it's not true.
That people, exactly, it's not true. Right?
I mean, there are going to be some people who actually advocate
it is the last thing. But at the same time, pro-life has also come to mean that you want to interfere in everyone else's life and cause them misery, even though it has nothing to do with you. I mean, it's very divisive because it's so personal, right? And being a woman and understanding this, right? And I'm an older woman, so it's even like less of an issue for me. I can't imagine if I was 25 years old right now and this was going on and I had to think about this every single day.
Or to sterilize yourself because you didn't want to.
That is incredible, right? So a couple of things, I mean, and there's one thing that you also like were kind of alluding to, but there's this other issue, this issue of surveillance. The issue of surveillance of a woman, right? We've all watched The Handmaid's Tale. Hollywood does not produce films without having a very acute sense of the things that are going on in society and just reaching into that one thing that we're all thinking about and just going there, right? To show us that horrible future where something gets played out and what would happen if. And there's a reason that a lot of people say The Handmaid's Tale, because so many statements are being made now. Project 2025. I mean, all of these things, you read them and you literally see a segment of The Handmaid's Tale. But it's, the surveillance thing really concerns me. So let me just point out one thing to you that probably the people of Guam did not know. The women of Guam did not know. So my opponent, Jim Moylan, is actually the co-sponsor on a bill that would allow the collection of data on women and pregnancies. Now,
that is not American.
It is.
Is that really something?
It is very high level. It doesn't actually track a person's name and abortions. It's very high level. But the way that it is written, and I read it very carefully because as a policy person, you read these laws very carefully because we all know it sounds like one thing and then it turns out it's used for something else. It is written so broadly that if it passed, and it hasn't passed, but if it were to pass, it would open up the door and allow the federal government to start to track information on a woman and her pregnancy.
How does that pass HIPAA? I don't understand that.
The way that the current bill is written, it doesn't include a woman's identifying information. It's at a higher level. But my point is that there are people that are lawmakers that are bringing other people along that are philosophically in the same group. And just like the Dobbs decision happened, it's a little bit at a time. They start to do something, we just want to give this back to the states. We're not really touching anything. Nothing's changed. And yet it has, because once you crack the door open, the monster can get in.
Well, women and babies are dying as a result of these laws.
Exactly. So, I thought the one moment when people really started to see, and this really started to turn around what was going on, was when IVF became an issue.
And the in vitro fertilization is
in
what
vitro
IVF
fertilization, yes. So the whole concept that at the very moment of conception is when a human is created. And the in vitro fertilization process takes women who can't have children, does that in a clinical environment, and then implants those embryos into a woman in order for that woman to have a child. And the failure rate, which is known, is something like 90%. Because of the decision, because of Dobbs, that is murder. You cannot say it's not murder in this situation, but it is murder in this situation.
Because according to this whole logic, the environment doesn't matter.
Exactly. Yeah. So you cannot say that that's it, there will not be any abortions. But in vitro fertilization, I'm the father of in vitro fertilization. Anybody can have in vitro fertilization. You cannot, because that will get challenged in a court of law. And there is no way, unless we are completely without laws in this country and everyone is completely not tethered to the truth, there is no way that those two things can become rectified. It just doesn't work.
Disher was explaining the same exact thing.
For people that believe in life, I believe in life. I do not believe that women should wantonly be able to go get abortions because they just didn't get contraception. That is just wrong, and that should be a practice that is stopped, that's counseled, that's ethically discouraged. There are limitations.
Stopped where? Stopped by whom?
before the decision, there was an active community that was engaged. Planned Parenthood, there were all of these organizations, there were church groups and community groups, all the people that believe in stopping this practice where women have too easy an access to something and they're using it in a sort of a wanton fashion, have every single resource available to them to counsel, to work with, to raise children, to raise young girls who know the barriers, who know the ethical limits, and who don't do those things. They have religious leaders, they have families, they have doctors who can discourage and can do that. You can put in place limitations on when and how and what. And those were all in place. It was not like anybody could go around and go do whatever they wanted. There were rules in many states that had limitations. There were guardrails. At the point in time that those went away, and they said, oh, but we're going to leave it up to the states, as if somehow states have much more wisdom than the federal government or the Supreme Court.
Or a doctor.
Or a doctor. You end up with distinct groups of political leadership, almost none of whom are doctors, and the majority of whom are not women. So you have male legislators who are not doctors in these regions passing laws that are then causing a gender gap in this election like you cannot believe, because you see men in general voting in one way and women just more and more trending in a different direction, because women see it in a very incredibly personal way because it's happening to women. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't affect men, it's their children as well. But there are so many other ways to solve this in the world. And I think, I hate that question when they ask me, Ginger, are you pro-life or are you pro-choice? Of course I'm pro-life, I'm not anti-life. I don't want to kill anybody. I don't want to kill the mother. I don't want a woman in a car accident. I use this. I don't want a woman in a car accident who was pregnant and something happens to her and she's bleeding out and a doctor is sitting there and I asked a doctor one time and I said, is there any other law that's just a law on a policy matter that prevents you from doing what you as a doctor with the Hippocratic oath to save someone's life? Is there any other law that prevents you from saving that woman's life and doing what you know is medically best for her? And they're like, no, I can't think of one. The only one that would stop him from maybe saving that woman's life would be if there was a law that said, that in that state said, or in that island said, that if you do anything that could be perceived as harming the life of an unborn child, you're going to get thrown in jail for 5 years. And we've got how many OBGYNs do we have left on the island?
Not enough.
And if we put in place rules that make an OBGYN have to second guess whether they're going to do something to save a woman's life or not, or they could just leave Guam and go work in a state where they can just have the ability to make the best medical decision, do you really think we're going to have any more OBGYNs coming to work on Guam?
No. And so this topic, this new information, to me it's new, has really got me thinking. And again, I'm not changing the value that I place on life in that unborn child, but I'm reading these real life situations of women dying, near death, afraid of dying, afraid of being prosecuted, so they're going to sterilize themselves.
And some who've died.
And some who died. And I can't ignore that. And I don't think anyone who is pro-life can responsibly ignore that.
Right.
And so this is a challenge now to people who've been on this side. And so that's why I wanted to offer you this opportunity to really explain beyond the 90-second time limits.
Right. And it's very hard for me because I hate saying, oh, I'm pro-choice and kind of moving on. Because everybody goes, oh, she hates, she just doesn't believe in the sanctity of life, or she
You're
just
from
wants
Dante's Inferno.
She wants to kill babies and she should go to hell. And it's so not the case.
That's not it.
I would never, ever say that. But I just don't believe that the law should interfere in something that is fundamentally a medical ethical question. When do we start telling people what their ethics should be and what their... Now, if it breaks the law, sure. But, and everybody's saying, well, it is breaking the law because you're killing a life. Okay, so then IVF is in vitro fertilization is completely off the table. Like, we cannot do that anymore because that's exactly what you're talking about. We cannot save a woman's life. And you know what? We're just going to have to accept the fact that some women are going to die because nobody can intervene. Like, do we really want to accept that as a country?
I think a reasonable person who loves a culture of life would not accept that. I have to make the notice here that this is the most emotional I've ever seen you become.
It's hard. I cannot believe my whole life that option has always been there. My daughter has always had that option. Every young woman has had that option. You know, it's something that I believe the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, was doing an interview, and he said, since the beginning of Roe versus Wade, up until the time that it was overturned, 65,000 babies were aborted that were the result of rape on minors, basically. And he said, had this decision been in place and that wouldn't have happened, then you're telling me that the right of the rapist is more important than the right of the girl. And that struck me as well. You know, and there's people who will say, well, you know, that they should have the child and you know, they could be adopted. You think about the mental pain and the lifelong implications for those 65,000 young women who had to go through something like that. And it really is incredible that in a country where for decades we have prided ourselves on science and ethics and freedom of religion and having good morals and having the ability to make decisions ourselves that are right and just and the thing that we need to do. And to all of a sudden turn that on its head and see so many states where the decision has created not just one or two examples, but hundreds and now thousands of examples. It needs to be relooked at. I am not saying that there are no boundaries. I am not, and everybody takes it to the extreme, right? You know, somebody takes it to the extreme. You know, Donald Trump was saying they can abort the baby after it's born. I mean, of course not. Of course you can't do that. That is murder. You cannot do that.
That's
Nobody
a bold-faced lie
that.
being
Nobody
perpetuated
is saying
by that side.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nobody is saying that. It is about reason. It is about ethics. It is about the strength of religion, the strength of ethics, the strength of families and people, raising a society that makes better decisions, but not inserting yourself in every single instance, which you can never foresee, and creating such incredible pain and hardship and death for people because there's this policy and you're standing on it and you're gonna put your sign out there and make sure that you are standing for it. You don't know every situation that every woman will go through.
And I'll tell you this, a legislature, no one but a doctor who is qualified to make this determination, and especially a legislature, should never be able to define what is life-threatening and what places someone's life in danger.
Exactly.
In any situation.
And I'm not saying it's not a hard decision, right? And I am not, people who are pro-choice are not pro-abortion. Absolutely not. It's just a question of where does that decision need to rest? And I say it needs to rest with the doctors, with the women, with the people they love, with their circle. And hopefully, if we need stronger ethics, if we need stronger programs to really educate women and really create a better environment, I'm all for that.
Thank you for educating me further on this subject.
Thank you.
I'm going to examine my conscience. I'm going to think about this a lot more. I'm going to read a lot more. And I'm going to listen to what people like you and others have to say on this subject. But one thing's for sure, I don't want to read about this stuff anymore happening to anyone, because as a pro-life person, I am not in favor of causing more death and suffering.
Right.
The Dobbs decision apparently, ironically, has done just that.
And it's also economic.
And economic, yes. Yes, we
Because
haven't
the
even
only
gone to that.
people that can actually go get the doctor's help that they need are the ones who are wealthy enough to be able to fly out or go somewhere else. It's the women that can least afford it, the women that don't have those resources,
who are mangled,
that
and
are
dying.
struggling the most. So I mean, public policy is tough. Like I said, you can never come up with the 100% solution. But I would hope that when people look at me, they would see somebody who is fair, who is measured, who listens to all sides, and who tries to sort of balance everything together so that you can come up with decisions that are the least harmful and the most supportive of people to live their lives in the best way possible.
Ginger Cruz, I'm done with asking you questions about the issues and the topics that we believe our viewers and our readers care about, and will base their decisions when they go to the polls on November 5 or early voting. So when we come back, I'm going to ask you a final question.
Okay.
And then I'm going to ask you to look into your camera and make your appeal to our audience.
Great. Thank you.
If you thought Ginger Cruz's interview this whole night was strong, you ain't seen nothing yet. When we come back, Ginger Cruz gives us a greater glimpse into her character, her faith, and even the purpose she believes God has given her in this life.
As we move forward in this election, as we contemplate who we're going to be supporting, it's so important that if we're going to maintain this level of effectiveness in the Congress and keep good things coming in for Guam, we need to elect competent people. We need to elect people who can articulate Guam's case, who can go on there and passionately fight for our island and make our island proud. Make our island proud with the level of representation that they're able to deliver. And really, in this election, there's really only one choice for that, and that is Congresswoman Ginger Cruz. We made a bid for the office, but the people of Guam have elected her in the primary, and we're supporting her this primary. Congressman James Moylan is grossly unfit for the position. He cannot articulate well. I mean, it's even on social media. If you look up some of his YouTube videos, you got people from other parts of the country commenting on how poorly he's doing when it comes time to speak up on our behalf. And then there are all the losses that we've suffered in just the last couple of years. So many setbacks, a complete reversal of fortunes. We went from all this really great stuff and so much momentum to now us having, fallen so far behind. So go into the voting booth, vote your conscience. But as for me, my conscience tells me it's clear. We cannot re-elect James Moylan. I'm supporting Ginger Cruz, and I'm asking you to do so as well. Thank you so much, Guam. God bless. See you soon.
Ginger Cruz, you've been such a trooper. Thank you so much for this, hour and a half interview. I'm not sure how long it's been.
A new show, 90 minutes.
90 minutes with Troy Torres. Anyway, so thank you for going through all of those issues with us. I'm curious about something. Because every now and then I think about the simple life. And I kind of want a simple life.
Yeah.
And that's neither here nor there. You're the candidate.
Yep.
You answer this for me. Have you ever thought about a more simple life? Politics is so complicated. Public service, it's complicated. You see it in the comments section, how complicated politics can be, right?
It is.
You ever thought of a contemplative life, a blue-collar life, a religious life, being something that's not as complicated? And tell us what you thought when you wanted a life like that, and then how did you go from that to being a journalist, a public servant, a businesswoman, and now someone seeking elected office? Hardly the furthest thing from a simple life.
This is true. Of course, I've fantasized every once in a while, especially you know, the years after I was working in Iraq,
Okay.
which were incredibly challenging, but at the same time incredibly rewarding. You know, every once in a while, just as a fun thought, I've thought, you know, I would just love to go back to Guam and own a coffee shop. I have thought of that, right? Just tiny little coffee shop. My husband will make pastries. We'll like do lattes and things, right? And just have a coffee shop.
That sounds beautiful.
Right? Every once in a, and it lasts for 10 minutes and then of course it goes away. But I think really the calling has always come because of the situation. I'm a person who has causes.
Okay.
So when I came back from college, I wanted to get into the media because it was a cause. I just thought it was great. Because at the time, there was no internet. So there was no way for people to understand what was going on. So you felt like you were doing something meaningful and useful because you were the only connection that people had to what was going on.
Everyone was waiting for you for this, at the 6
At
o'clock
the 6
news.
o'clock news, because it was the only way that we were connected, right? And you were, it was like a public service back then. And then when I got into government, it was the same thing because you felt like you were doing something useful. It was bigger than you. The reason I was gone from Guam for so long was because I left Guam in 2000, and in 2001, 9/11 happened. And that was it was such a shocking event. I felt like I had to become a part of it. I had to do something to contribute to the national security, to defend America from terrorism. And it took me on this 8-year-long detour, right? Teaching, another thing. So all of these different things, simplicity for me makes me feel like I am not contributing my full value that my mom and dad always said. They wanted me to go out there and learn everything that I could and gather as much experience as I could so that I could give back. My parents didn't say, go out there and learn everything and then get really rich. That was never something in my household. Or they didn't say, you know, oh, just do whatever you want, honey, and have a really good life. They never said that to me either. It was always instilled in me, go get as much experience and whatever you decide to do, which has been lots of different things in my life, make sure that it means something and make sure that you are giving back.
Do you feel good about that now?
I feel great about that. And I also feel like this is my time. I feel like I've reached a point in my life where all the things that I have learned and I have spent so much time taking care and talking to people and absorbing it and reading about it and experiencing it, it has contributed to this ability now to just sort of see solutions that I think are sometimes more difficult for others to see because of the unique sort of, you know, understanding Guam's problems. I understand Guam's problems. I've been thinking about Guam's problems since my very first job as an analyst in the Guam legislature in 1984. I came back my first summer and that was what I did. And since then, just all of that contributed. And so a simpler life would probably be the worst thing that could ever happen to me because I would know in my heart that I wasn't contributing and I would feel lazy and I would feel selfish and it wouldn't be a good feeling.
So you think this is God's plan for you, the not simple life?
I do think it's God's plan for me. And I'll tell you what, the older I get, the more I realize when you try and do something and it doesn't work, and if you just are quiet and still and you listen and God has another plan for you, and then you do that other thing, it always turns out better. And my faith in God gets stronger the older that I get because you've lived longer and you've seen it turn out better every single time. And if you trust in that and you do your part and you do your best and you try to be as fair and even and level as you can, I think at the end of the day, it is the most rewarding path. So complexity is my space. I love it. And it's where I think I can give the most back.
Can I just say that God has been pretty darn good to you, and I am so envious because you talked about your age. You're talking about your age. You're like, I'm going to be 60. And I'm like, oh gosh, I hate her so much. I have more more wrinkles than you do. Come on. Come on, Ginger.
Oh, no. Yeah. My classmates are like, okay, we'll do a group picture just so everybody knows.
Yeah, I saw that group picture. Your classmates look great.
We all look great, I know.
Yeah,
we're the
what
lucky
were you
class.
guys eating at Academy?
And class of 82, I don't know.
Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
I'm going to get off of this stage and I'm going to ask you to look directly into the camera.
Okay.
And make your appeal to voters. Make your appeal to Kandit Man, as I like to call it, and talk to them about why they should vote for Ginger Cruz.
Okay. Well, first, let me thank Troy, because this opportunity is really one that I think gets to the heart of the election, and that's really getting to know me. The people that have been my friends and my family over the years know me, but to all of the people who don't know me, I hope this was an opportunity to see who I am, how much love I have for the island, and how much caring that I have for doing things that are going to help make Guam better. I don't have all the answers. I am somebody that is going to work with as many people out throughout Guam as I can to create a long-term vision and then do my level best to accomplish that with a great team of people. Part of the success of any individual is the people that they work with. And I hope to have a huge network of people that can share problems, that can share solutions, and that together we can start to put together really complicated situations and find solutions. I don't want to tell people that I have the answer to housing in my back pocket, because obviously if somebody had the answer, they would have done it already. Nobody has an easy answer to anything, but we do have huge problems on the island. And I've looked at them for a long, long time. And I understand that the reason we have these problems is because they're complicated. And they require somebody who is 100% committed to working very hard and very smart, bringing together people to tackle each one of those issues until we come up with a solution. I'm going to have a release of my new platform, Platform 3.0. It's going to be coming out next week. I've invited Troy to come to the press conference we're having, and I invite everybody. If you want more detail on what I'm going to do, go and read about in detail what I plan. And that's not set in stone. If you have a different idea, if you disagree, I want to hear from everybody. But through it all, I can guarantee you something, that the most important quality that I believe Guam needs in a representative in Washington, D.C. is somebody who not only is articulate and able to be that voice for the people of Guam, not only somebody who can charm Congress and get them convinced that they need to help us, or if they want to fight us, who can fight for the people of Guam and fight hard until we get some progress. But I think we also need somebody who is able to bring us all together and who is honest, who will tell you, look, we might not be able to accomplish this, or maybe we need to try another path. But I think if we look into the future and we find that our solutions demand somebody who is 100% committed to getting them solved and who understands it's not easy, then I really ask you to please consider voting for me either early at the Westin, at early voting, or on November 5th. And I promise you that when we work together, you are going to be proud of Guam and proud of what we can do for ourselves and our island in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Sidza Usmaasi, and maraming salamat po.
Kandit thanks Ms. Cruz for her time and for her thoughtful answers. We ask you now to do your due diligence, and on Tuesday, November 5, vote. For Kandit News, I'm Troy Torres. Good night.